But this raises the broader question. How broken are we? And is it irretrievable? And I hear this, you know, I've got some friends who are really dour, and I get it, but I'm not. Because if you look at the sweep of American history, we've been in worse places before. Some in this room can remember 1968, 69, 70, 71, 72, 73. Did you feel like the country was coming apart? You know, we had the Great Depression. I just, the book that I'm working on presidential decision making, I'm going through the era leading up to the election of 1800. Talk about a broken country. We all remember Sumner being caned by Butler in the run-up to the Civil War. There's a brilliant new book by Joanne Freeman on that entire decade, and it turns out violence was routine in the U.S. Congress. But then I wrote this book that Larry was kind enough to mention. I strongly recommend it to you. I think I did a hell of a job with it.
I agree.
Thank you. Now, and look, you know, if you in political science majors, how many of you studied realignment theory? 5 great American elections that changed American politics. There's a political system in place before, and then it changes, and it's something different after the election of 1800, the end of the Federalist era, and the emergence of the Democratic Republicans under Jefferson. 1828, the birth of the modern Democratic Party. 1860, the end of the Whigs, the emergence of the Republicans. 1896, 1932, the emergence of the New Deal. But the election we study, least among them, is the election of 1896. And when we study it one of two ways. It is either the election involving the dynamic young boy orator of the Platte, William Jennings Bryan, 36 years old, populist leader who becomes the nominee of the Democratic Party and then loses, and we ignore the guy who actually won, or we see it as sort of an anonymous election in which these forces of populism and industrialism and capitalism and immigration sort of come together as anonymous forces and weave their way through the political system and generate an outcome, which to some degree is true. All of 4 of those things are important. But the election of 1896 is really an election about people who do strange things. It's a story with sex and violence and backstabbing and betrayal and twists and turns worthy of a coked-up Hollywood screenwriter. The outcome is very much up in doubt and is settled not by anonymous forces, but by the actions of individuals in responding in this crucible of a very important election. And the figure who ought to dominate the story is the mild-mannered governor, reform-minded Republican governor of Ohio, who's a different kind of Republican, who becomes the first Republican to be endorsed by a member of the Catholic hierarchy. The Anglo-Saxon Republican Party is so open to new forces that he takes on the biggest anti-immigrant group in the country, receives the support of leaders of the Catholic hierarchy, has a rabbi open the Republican National Convention, and is the first presidential candidate of either party to appear in front of a group of black voters and openly ask for their support for his party's nomination, which he does in March of 1895, first in Jacksonville, Florida, and then 3 days later on April 1st in Savannah, Georgia. A remarkable man, and nobody pays any attention to him. But to understand William McKinley, who incidentally enters the Civil War at the age of 18 as a private and ends the war as a major, having survived 3 suicide missions and having been recommended for the Congressional Medal of Honor, which he refused to have his application pressed because he said, "I was only doing my duty." He spent most of the war in the Shenandoah Valley. He is the first Republican presidential candidate to ever meet with an organized group of Confederate veterans. He invites 2,000 men of the Shenandoah Valley campaign in butternut gray uniforms to come to Canton, Ohio. The first time a Republican presidential campaign has ever been seen with Democratic war veterans in a moment of national unity that is heart-wrenching to read. 2,000 Confederate veterans, along with their Union compatriots, march up North Market Avenue on October 9th of 1896. McKinley emerges on the stage, gives a very emotional short speech and says, sectionalism was surrendered. Only sectionalism was surrendered at Appomattox, not honor. If we are ever forced to fight again, God forbid that we shall fight as brothers under a common flag. The country has never seen this. But to understand that election, I had to understand the Gilded Age. And the more I studied the Gilded Age, the more I realized it's like today, only worse. We have 5 presidential elections in a row in which nobody gets 50% of the vote. Nobody. 2 of those presidents are elected with a majority in the Electoral College, but lose the popular vote, as Bush did in 2000 and Trump did in 2016. A 3rd president is elected with a majority in both the popular vote and the Electoral College, but his popular vote margin is 9,600 votes. We have 2 years with a Republican president, House and Senate, 2 years with a Democratic president, House and Senate, and 20 years of divided government where nothing gets done. Because they not only have deeply divergent views about the future of the country, but they hate each other's guts. They are still fighting the Civil War. When the Democrats take control of the House in 1874, for the first time in 16 years, it's called the victory of the brigadiers, because so many former Confederate officers are now elected in southern districts, primarily through the mechanism of, through violence and intimidation, restraining the black Republican vote. Even in 1896, there are 3 states in the South, South Carolina, Mississippi, and Louisiana, in which a majority of the men over the age of 21 are black, and they're overwhelmingly Republican. And the best that McKinley can get in any state is 25% of the vote in Louisiana, because the black vote is being wiped out by law and violence. He gets 7% of the vote in Mississippi, where nearly 60% of adult men are black. And the politics is ugly. You read these congressional record debates, and at moments they're unbelievably vicious. There's a meaningless vote. Well, it's not meaningless. Democrats try and pass a free trade measure through the House in 1884. They know it's never got a chance in the Senate, but they want to sort of set up the tone for the general election, the presidential election that fall, and it fails. Because a smart, adroit protectionist on the Ways and Means Committee organizes across the aisle and gets 40 Democrats, mainly from sheep-growing districts, to vote against this free trade measure because it's going to hurt the sheep growers back in their districts. William McKinley. And one of the Democrats who's angry about this stands up and begins to excoriate his fellow Democrats. He calls them the 40 thieves. And attacks a former Speaker of the House, Democrat Speaker, saying he and his 40 thieves have stolen this from us, and begins to take one particular member and just dump over him in ways that are just unbelievable. Finally, the member's had enough. He stands up, Mr. Speaker, the member's violating the decorum of the House. The Speaker says the honorable gentleman from Georgia is out of order. And he turns to his colleague who's just had him reprimanded and says, I would not blank you if you were a dog. Now, it's 4 letters, lipsed out in the congressional record, but I have a general sense of what he was saying. You think it's bad today with a shutdown? We're going to shut down a quarter of the government for 34 days? In 1888, the Republicans elect the president, the Senate, and have a narrow majority in the House. Back then, they were civilized. They swore him in in March, and then they brought him back after the summer had cooled off in October and November. And that year they came back in November of 1889, and the House begins to meet, and the Democrats announced that because it's a narrow majority for the Republicans, they will not answer the roll call. They will deny the House the ability to have a quorum and thereby conduct business. So for 2 months, the House of Representatives of the United States of America is not able to pass a single bill. Because whenever they have a vote, and somebody calls for a quorum call, the Democrats don't answer the quorum, and they don't have a quorum, and they can't vote. Finally, Speaker Thomas Bracken Reed's had enough. 6 foot 3 inches tall, very erudite, 300 pounds, sort of looks like a bowling pin with a walrus mustache painted on him. Very erudite, has a private library in Maine of 5,000 volumes, has a French tutor that he meets with every afternoon to perfect his French. Smart and tough. He's had enough. So on a motion, a typical motion of the Gilded Age. This is also something revealing. In the Gilded Age, if you were in the majority in the House, and there was a minority member who'd been reelected by a small number of votes, you phonied up an election challenge and kicked him out in order to grow your majority. McKinley himself, who won re-election in 1882 by 7 votes, is kicked out. Takes him a year and a half to kick him out, but he's kicked out in 1884 on an election challenge. So on this day, in January of 1890, the Republican Speaker is going to kick out a West Virginia Democrat who's won re-election by 50 votes. So they have the vote. but he's prepared. He has sergeant-at-arms stationed in front of every door in the House chamber, and unbeknownst to the members, he's had the doors barricaded on the outside. So at the end of the vote, a quorum call is called. The Democrats refuse to answer the quorum call. There's not a quorum present, and Reed says to the clerk, the chair directs the clerk to show Mr. Jones present, Mr. Smith present, calls out the name of every Democrat on the House floor. First thing that happens is they all head for the exits. But they can't get out because the sergeant-at-arms have linked arms. One Democrat gets out of the House chamber. Constantine August of Rusk County, Texas, beats the crap out of the sergeant-at-arms and uses his cowboy boots to kick out the slats in the door and make good his escape. One enraged Democrat from Kentucky stands up and says, "Under God and the Constitution, you have no right to count me present upon the floor without my permission," to which Reed coolly replies, "Does the honorable gentleman from Kentucky deny he's present on the floor of the House?" This kicks off a 2.5-month-long debate, first on the floor of the House and then in front of the United States Supreme Court, as to whether or not the Speaker of the House has the right to direct the clerk to show people present on the floor who haven't answered the call. And in the meantime, not a single bill is passed in the House of Representatives. Now, was the debate tough? Yes. The opening day of the debate, another Texan makes a contribution to the tone of the time. William Henry Martin of Athens, Texas. 6'6" tall, thin as a rail, mean as a snake, fought the entire Civil War as an officer in the celebrated Hood's Brigade. Some of you who are Civil War historians will recognize this ferocious fighting unit. His nickname was Howdy. He got his nickname because after one particular battle, Robert E. Lee asked for the privilege of reviewing the Hood's Brigade in person, and as he rode by and inspecting the troops, Martin, who was a staff officer, stood up in his stirrups, took off his Texas hat and waved it at Lee and yelled out, "Howdy!" Hattie Martin stands up on the floor of the U.S. House of Representatives, points a bony finger at Reed standing on the podium, and says, "If any member," turning to his fellow Democrats, "will order me to remove this dictator from his position of power upon the podium, I will do so by force forthwith." Reed says, "The honorable gentleman from Texas is out of order," and moved on. Martin is so pissed off that the next day he shows up, takes a seat where John Hager is, right in front of the Speaker's podium, pulls out his 16-inch-long Bowie knife, and spends the entire day's session methodically sharpening it on his boot sole in order to menace Speaker Reed. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but after the Republicans took control in 2010, I don't remember Nancy Pelosi doing that with her stilettos in 2011. I just don't. My point is this. We had a broken system. And the responsibility for the brokenness probably fell on both parties. But along came an opportunity for the American people to pick somebody who would restore decorum and unite the country. It's hard for us to imagine the scene of October 9th. It's hard for us to imagine the moment where the country saw blue and gray together. But the news reports of the time said that there were people lining the streets of the small village. Thousands of people had come to see this spectacle. And there's the Grand Army of the Republic Band and the United Confederate Volunteer Band, and they're playing patriotic music as blue and gray together in units and squads move up North Market Avenue. And people begin spontaneously singing songs, patriotic songs, and openly weeping. Every member of the Confederate delegation has been given a badge, half blue and half gray, with a chromolith of McKinley at the bottom. And on the badge is a favorite quote of McKinley's taken from Washington's farewell address. "No east, no west, no north, no south, but a common country." I have one of the badges, and we'll be a common country again. Thanks for having me.
Karl, that was a tour de force. I mean, it was history lesson. It was politics. It was Elizabeth Taylor. It was Norway. I mean, everything was in there. So we enjoyed it, and I want to thank him for coming all the way from Texas to do this for us. And as I said, he will stay here and be patient and take some selfies until he collapses. You hear him coughing there, but it's true. It's going on for a while. So be thoughtful of him. But those who want to leave, you go back and get your boxed lunch. We hope you have a great day. We hope you enjoyed the 20th Annual American Democracy Conference. And, you know, that's it. What can I tell you? Thank you.